Hello again. Thank you for joining me today. This chapter is about love. And who doesn't long for love? But as wonderful as it is, love requires wisdom and self-control. Sometimes emotions and desires can lead us into situations we never expected. My friends, like many of us, find themselves at a crossroads in this chapter. How will they handle it? You'll have to keep listening to find out. Now let's begin chapter 3, Renewed Love. The next day, Joshua woke Ruth to join him in his morning devotions. Even though she kept her relationship close with God, being away studying had made her neglect her morning prayers. It was a refreshing change to see Joshua still doing his. Ruth saw in him the confident, spiritual man Grandma Joan had told her she would someday meet, when the time was right, and that they would complement each other. Joshua held her hands and prayed before they read a scripture from John 3 verses 13 to 21. Ruth felt the Spirit of God in their midst, a feeling of abundant love and peace. Ruth noticed a few changes in Joshua. He was more muscular than the slender man she'd left years ago. All the work he had done on vehicles seemed to be good for him. But as she studied him, she realized how much she'd missed his contagious smile. His warmth that got her through her parents' death, and those beautiful brown eyes of his that always sparkled. "Hey you. Come on back," Joshua said, cupping her face in his hands. "What are you thinking about?" Snapping out of her daze, Ruth smiled and said, "I missed you, Josh." "I missed you too, Ruth. It was dull here without you. The women here all think I'm crazy or gay because I refused them," he said with a laugh. "Why didn't you get married? I wanted to ask you many times but didn't know how. Well, the Lord told me the woman for me wasn't among any of them. Why didn't you?" "I didn't have time for romance with all my hectic studies. If it weren't for you and Grandma Joan, I don't know if I would have stuck it out. It was hard and I wanted to quit a few times. All I wanted was to be back here with you, and live a nice, quiet life." "Ah, you say that now, Ruth, but I know you. If you had quit and returned here before you had graduated, you would have been horrible to be around," he laughed. Ruth made a goofy face. "You're right. I would have been miserable." She wanted to tell him her desire to return home was because she loved him, that she didn't want to lose him to another. After breakfast, Ruth gathered the things she needed for her day out on the river with Joshua. Beautiful white clouds scattered across the sky, and trees danced to the upbeat tempo of the wind. Few people were out and about as the two friends walked to Joshua's house to pick up a few items for their trip. All the neighborhood houses were just as Ruth had last seen them. The dwellings lined both sides of the street, separated by walls, fences, or even nothing at all. The road that ran through the community was safe for children to play on at most times, aside from the occasional vehicles that passed through. However, all parents, including hers, had banned their kids from using it as a playground in fear for their safety. Ruth wondered if it was still so today. Neighbors came out one by one as they neared Joshua's house. So far, Ruth saw no one she recognized, but as she and Joshua continued to walk, the few women she spotted all stared at them and whispered as they walked by. The women's eyes held such bitterness, but she remembered what Joshua had told her about them, and smiled broadly. She entwined her fingers with his and greeted the women, pretending not to know why they whispered. "That should give them something to talk about," she said to herself, still smiling. Joshua chuckled when he noticed what Ruth was doing, but said nothing. He enjoyed her show of ownership to the other women. Although she now gave them more to talk about, it didn't bother him. All that mattered to him was that he and Ruth were together again. When they reached his house, Ruth stopped to take it in. "Josh, you fixed up the house so beautifully. I like the new color." "Thanks. I added an extra bedroom too." "Why do you need another bedroom when you already have two? It's just you in the house." "Well, I turned Dad's room into a storage room, and since you hardly stay at your parents' house when you come home to visit, it just seemed more convenient. I mean, what's the use in having two houses when it's just you and me?" "You're right. It does make sense," she blushed. "Oh wow, Josh. When did you do this?" She had just seen the beautiful flower garden out back. Joshua only smiled. "You did this for me, didn't you?" she continued, feeling overwhelmed by the obvious care he had put into it. "It was one way to keep you close, Ruth. You always said you wanted a garden of your own, when we used to lie in the grass and talk about our future after a swim." Everything in his future included Ruth, and he always made sure she knew. From them going off to college together to getting jobs nearby. But when it came to romance, they had both shied away from the topic. A seat stood in the midst of the garden, with a table close by for drinks. Joshua pulled Ruth towards it to sit. "Do you like it?" She smiled, then caressed his cheek when she saw a reflection of her own feelings in his eyes. "I love it, Josh, it's breathtaking. You remembered all my favorite flowers, especially the rose turtleheads, which bloom around our birthdays." Ruth wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered soft against his ear. "I love you too." Joshua slowly eased her back to look deep into her eyes. She smiled at him. "Yes, Josh, I love you." He held her tight once more, and she gave in to him, letting him know she was his. "I have always loved you, Ruth, and yesterday, after we embraced by your car, the Holy Spirit told me that you were the one. With all my heart, I love you. I'm so glad to be back here with you. I've missed your face, your crazy laugh, and your protection from all the scary monsters and creepy men." Joshua kissed Ruth's cheek before he released her again. "I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going inside to get everything ready for our trip," he said before running off to the house. Ruth sat in the garden, taking in the beauty that surrounded her. She felt overwhelmed that the person she loved most in the whole world had done it for her, and thanked the Lord for keeping his promise and answering her prayer. She couldn't miss the newly built pool. It looked beautiful, and she figured Joshua had built it for himself. Swimming always relaxed him when he felt stressed. If you wanted to be Joshua's friend, you had to learn how to swim. Neither of Ruth's parents had known how. Joshua's mom had taught her on evenings spent at his house before her parents returned home from work. Ruth walked across to the pool, removing her shoes and placing her feet in the unruffled clear blue water as she sat at the pool's edge. She hadn't swum in ages, and all her happiest times were when she swam with Joshua. She jumped when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Joshua had returned. "Josh, let's go on the river tomorrow and just relax here today. What do you say?" "We can even camp out here tonight, just like old times." "Splendid. Let me put on my swimsuit." She picked up her bag on her way inside the house. Joshua got into his swimming trunks and jumped into the pool. After a few laps around the pool, he wondered if all the years Ruth had been away had somehow caused her to forget her way around his house. Then he remembered that she had always had a curious mind, and must have stopped to look around at the changes in the house. His heart raced when he saw Ruth walking towards him. It was the first time he saw her as a full woman in her swimsuit, and she made him nervous. She looked beautiful and smiled as she walked towards him. He stared, mesmerized, and soon burst into laughter when she tried to do a sexy catwalk towards him. Her body looked fuller and curvier than before, and her light brown skin glowed. As she approached and jumped in, he saw the same perky, upbeat personality resurface as when she left. They swam next to each other, testing each other's endurance, and he won every time. Ruth, being a sore loser, jumped on Joshua's back to dunk him, but only got dunked herself instead. "Josh, do you still think that it's due to you being half Asian that makes you such an excellent swimmer?" Ruth asked after he dunked her. "Nay, I only felt that way then because I used to win all those medals and had a world champion swimmer for a mum. You know, Mum used to let me train with her all the time after she knew I could swim on my own. I remember you used to boast that all the great Olympic swimmers were Asians. You loved saying that swimming is an Asian sport," she mocked him. "But they were, and it is," he smirked as she rolled her eyes at him. "But I'm part Asian too, and you always teased me whenever we went swimming, saying that I'd never catch up to you, even though your mum also taught me." Joshua laughed aloud, then closed the gap between them and kissed her lips. "Well, sweetheart, there is always some exception." He tried to dash off, but this time Ruth grabbed hold of him and dunked him. So many wonderful feelings came back to them as the hours passed. After the sun set, they took a break from swimming and relaxed at the pool's edge. Ruth rested her head on Joshua's shoulder, wrapping her arm around his. Joshua was finally happy having his Ruth back home. She had always known how to make him smile. You remember when we used to sit out here under that avocado tree? Ruth pointed to the far end of the pool. Joshua smiled. How could I forget such times? You would always sit and hold my hand every time I found myself thinking about Mum not seeing me win all those medals. And we would sit there until you felt like talking or wanted to go back inside. Joshua faced her. I'm so glad you were there, Ruth. Returning his gaze to the avocado tree. He continued. Dad had accepted that Mum was gone, but he sometimes acted like she was still here. That made it hard for me to let her go. I needed those hugs of yours so much then, he told her with a smile. Ruth stared at him with a puzzled look. I don't remember those hugs. When did I start giving you hugs? Joshua gave Ruth a wicked smile as he now gave her his full attention. When we got older, I think maybe when we turned 14 or so. But that's not all I remember. Oh yeah. What else do you remember? The kiss. The what? The kiss, Ruth, come on, stop playing. I know you remember. It wasn't even a real kiss, just a peck on the cheek. She burst out laughing. Yeah, but your cheek got so red. So did yours, and you act like you didn't remember, huh? He chuckled. I did, she blushed. I just wanted to see how much you remember. Joshua caressed her face, and Ruth closed her eyes at the sensation of his touch. He kissed her cheek gently, and again closer to her lips, before tasting her warm, soft lips. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her with such passion. Feeling the tenderness of his hands as they caressed her back, Ruth melted in his arms. Joshua then traced his kisses along her neck and all over her chest and onto the top of her breasts before he could hear Ruth calling out to him, almost as lost in the moment as he was. Josh, he pulled back when he heard her call again. We can't, baby. You know that, not yet. Ruth smiled at him and caressed his face. I'm sorry, Ruth. I know, I just got so caught up, overwhelmed by my feelings. Forgive me, he said and kissed her cheek. Let's go change and we can come eat out here afterwards, okay? Ruth agreed and Joshua jumped up out of the pool and pulled her up. He then wrapped a towel around her and off they went to shower and change. Joshua took Ruth to the bedroom he had added for her, then left to wash. She looked around the room and was amazed by how much he had put into building it for her. He had painted it her favorite color, lavender, and added her favorite flowers in the bathroom. Everything that reminded him of her. Even her favorite books, The Count of Monte Cristo and Les Miserables, which stood on a table by the bed. They were the very ones she used to read before she went off to university. Joshua had kept them safe for her. Ruth remembered how much he loved when she would read to him. It was one of their special things they loved doing together. He had helped build her confidence in reading aloud, as she had always been shy growing up, except around him. She took both books downstairs and went into the kitchen to prepare some food. To her surprise, she found Joshua making their favorite dish, grilled chicken with pasta, so she helped with whatever else he needed. It was fun cooking together again. They took their dishes out to the backyard to eat at the garden table before Joshua went back inside to get drinks. He noticed Ruth's books on the kitchen table, bringing them out with 2 bottles of orange juice from the refrigerator. He held the books up with a questioning smile, causing Ruth to laugh. I found them upstairs and thought we could read after dinner like old times. You can make your funny comments on the characters the way you like to do. Great. I like that idea. Come on. Let's eat. Joshua sat down and they blessed the meal and ate. The night air was refreshing. It wasn't chilly but not warm either. Just perfect enough to sit and enjoy. Well, which book should I read? The one where the man had a miserable start but gained redemption in the end. Or, oops, they both had that, didn't they? Ruth laughed at herself. Okay, how about the one where the man wanted revenge against his best friend for sending him to prison falsely, or the one where a man's broken life changed by the kindness of a priest and the love of a girl? Joshua laughed. Well, let's read the one where the man got back his girl after so many years. The Count of Monte Cristo it is. She opened the book and began to read. Instead of doing his usual thing about the characters, Joshua found himself caught up in watching Ruth as she read, seeing her face light up when she looked at him. He was happy. "Ruth." She paused and looked up at him. "Marry me," he whispered. Her eyes watered and her lips curled into a smile. "Yes, Josh, I will," she answered without hesitation. Joshua pulled her into his arms and squeezed her tightly against him, rocking her gently. They proceeded to sit for a few more hours, watching the stars while making fun of each other. That's it for today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss it. If this story speaks to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Marshally would love to hear from you. See you in the next chapter.